Lando took pole by 12 thousandths of a second. Lewis Hamilton didn't just lose that pole, he told you why in his own words before anyone else could spin it for him. Keep that in mind because it's the whole story. Ferrari's qualifying at the Hungaroring ended with 2 grid penalties on their side of the garage in the same session. One for an impeding call against Oscar Piastri, which we've already broken down on this channel, and one quieter admission that almost nobody picked up on. Hamilton in Parc Fermé, speaking directly to David Coulthard, said this: "We've been doing a great job all weekend. I felt solid throughout qualifying, and then for some reason we went out first, which I don't think was the right call." Read that again. Not, "we were unlucky," not, "the conditions changed." He said, on camera, in his own words, that the strategic call to send him out first on the final run was wrong. That is not a driver venting about track conditions. That is a 7-time champion, in real time, disagreeing with the decision his own pit wall made. If you want the stories the paddock doesn't put in the press releases, subscribe right now and drop a comment telling me which country you're watching from, because this next part hits differently depending on how closely you follow strategy calls where you are. Here's the sequence, stripped of noise. Hamilton had been on provisional pole through most of Q3. On the final runs, the order in which cars leave the pit lane matters more than people realize, because track conditions in Formula One evolve constantly through a session. Rubber goes down, temperatures shift, grip improves lap by lap. Being the last car out on a final run typically means better conditions to exploit. Ferrari sent Hamilton out first. Norris, by contrast, was effectively the last car across the line, and he used that final sliver of track evolution to find time in the middle sector and snatch pole by the smallest margin of the season. Was this a technical failure, like a 5-second penalty for a broken part? No. Was it a rules infringement like the yellow flag call we just covered? No. This is purely a judgment call, made by the people managing Ferrari's session about when to release their fastest driver onto a track that was still improving. And their fastest driver just told the world, on record, that he thinks they got it wrong. This is not a rival engineer briefing the press anonymously. This is not paddock speculation dressed up as insight. This is the driver himself, standing in Parc Fermé minutes after losing pole by 12 thousandths of a second, naming the decision and disagreeing with it in front of a camera. And here's where it gets interesting, because this isn't the only strategic miscue Ferrari's side of the garage had in that exact session. We've already covered on this channel how their own pit wall admitted, over the radio, before the stewards even opened their investigation, that the team failed to warn Hamilton in time about Piastri closing in behind him at turn 1. 2 separate calls in the same 12-minute session, both originating from the same pit wall, both costing Ferrari something concrete. One cost Hamilton the pole, the other cost him 3 grid places, and if you're not subscribed yet, this is exactly the kind of story you'll want to be here for when it happens again. Because a pit wall, making 2 costly reads in one session, rarely stops there. Let's do the arithmetic on what going out first actually cost. 12 thousandths of a second. That's the margin Norris beat Hamilton by for pole position. Track evolution through a Formula One qualifying session, especially somewhere like the Hungaroring, where rubber buildup matters enormously on a tight, technical layout, routinely accounts for gains far larger than that, between back-to-back laps just minutes apart. Being first out instead of last out is not a cosmetic detail. It is, by Hamilton's own account and by basic session mechanics, a real and quantifiable disadvantage. And in this case, it was the exact difference between a Ferrari on pole and a Ferrari starting second, on a circuit where the front row genuinely matters because overtaking is close to impossible. Now, the case espejo. Line these 2 Ferrari decisions up next to each other and look at what they share. In the impeding incident, the pit wall's failure was a communication gap. Hamilton wasn't told a rival was approaching until it was too late to react. In the strategy call, the failure was a sequencing decision, sending the faster driver out at the wrong point in the session's evolution curve. Different mechanisms, same underlying pattern, a pit wall managing complex, live decisions under pressure, and getting the timing wrong both times. In the same 12 minutes, with the same driver paying for both mistakes, neither of these calls, taken alone, is a firing offense or even especially unusual in this sport. Every team occasionally sends a driver out at a suboptimal moment. Every pit wall occasionally has a radio message, land a beat too late. That is a defensible reality of racing under time pressure. It's also not the version of events that survives two of them happening to the same driver in the same session, one right after the other. So here's the interrogation. Did Ferrari know, going into that final run, that track conditions were still evolving? Yes, every team monitors this in real time. It is basic session data. Did they have the option to hold Hamilton back and send him out later? Presumably, yes, based on how they structured other cars' runs that same session. Did Hamilton believe in the moment that the call was wrong? By his own words, yes, immediately after the lap. Was there any indication the team disputed his red afterward? None has surfaced. That's not proof of incompetence. It's a driver contradicting his own team's strategic judgment on camera within minutes of the decision costing him something real. What comes next is the part nobody in Maranello wanted written down twice in the same weekend. Before I give it to you, subscribe, because this pattern doesn't end with one qualifying session. And when it shows up again, you'll want the file already open. Here's the escape hatch, and it's a real one. Ferrari might genuinely have believed being first out was the smarter read. First out cars sometimes benefit from a cleaner track with less traffic, less risk of being balked by a slower car ahead, and in some sessions that outweighs the track evolution advantage of going last. That is a coherent strategic philosophy, and plenty of engineers would defend it. It is also not the read that survived contact with what actually happened on the timing sheet, where the last car out found time in exactly the sector Ferrari's philosophy was supposed to protect against, so follow the chain. A driver questioning his own team's tactical call is not on its own a crisis. What turns it into something worth watching is what it reveals about who is actually steering decisions inside that garage right now, at a moment when Ferrari is managing two title-caliber drivers under enormous pressure. In the same season, their pit wall has already had to publicly own a separate communication failure. When the person driving the car starts publicly second-guessing the people making the calls, that's not noise. That's a signal about where trust currently sits inside that building. We've talked before on this channel about what it looks like when a pit wall gets sequencing wrong under pressure. It's the exact shape of story that ran through Vasseur's radio admission after this same session. Different mechanism this time, same underlying tension, a team managing complexity in real time, and a driver who is no longer staying quiet when he thinks they've gotten it wrong. Do I know with certainty that Ferrari's read was the incorrect one? In some objective sense that would hold up to every engineer in the paddock? No. Strategy calls are probabilistic, not provably right or wrong in the moment they're made. And that's exactly the point. Because if the team's own lead driver isn't confident the call was correct, immediately after living through the consequence of it, then the certainty the team projected when they made that decision wasn't as solid as it looked from the outside. Here's the verdict. Hamilton didn't lose pole to Lando Norris by 12 thousandths of a second because he was slower. He lost it because his own team sent him out at the wrong moment in a session that was still evolving, and he said so in his own words before the ink was dry on the result. Combined with a separate pit wall failure in the same 12 minutes that cost him 3 grid places outright, this was not a bad Saturday for Ferrari's driver. It was a bad Saturday for Ferrari's decision-making twice over, and their driver was the one who noticed first. So tell me, is this one strategic misread? Or is Ferrari's pit wall making a habit of getting the timing wrong when it matters most? Drop your verdict and hit like if you already know which one it is. Monza is next on the calendar after the summer break, a circuit that punishes exactly this kind of sequencing error even more severely, given how much low-drag track evolution matters on the fastest layout of the season. Whatever Ferrari changes about how they manage these calls between now and then will tell you everything about whether Budapest was a one-off or the start of a longer conversation about who's actually in control of that pit wall. This story is not over, and when the next domino falls on this side of the garage, you'll want to be here. Hit subscribe, hit like, and I'll see you in the comments. Until the next one.